to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for listening, sharing, and subscribing to this podcast. We really appreciate your support here. If you want to look for other ways to support this podcast and the stories that come from it, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think, and it definitely helps this podcast and the stories within it get discovered. Additionally, we have a Patreon if you want to support in that way, and that is going to be the Truth in This Art podcast, and that's on Patreon. Head on over there and support us to help us spread the word and elevate the truth in this art. Today, we're diving into the world of comics, but not the kind that you might be thinking of. My next guest crafts comics, autobiographical in nature, by weaving real stories and experiences into illustrated art. From interning to Marvel to putting together his own self-published series, he does it all. Please give a warm welcome to my guest, Jonathan Baylis. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. It's fantastic. I just ate dinner, actually. I got it in early. I've been doing this sort of new things. I'm feeling that my energy level is as high as it's been all day.
What did you make?
This is going to sound really, really wild, but I had this ground chicken, bunch of different like spices, the low sodium stuff. And I spam vegetables in there. So like kale, carrots, rice, cauliflower, and it just worked. And because I want a little flavor in there, I've been playing with these different like Asian flavors. So I threw some chili crunch from Momofuku in there, and a little bit of cheese. It worked out really well, nice and balanced.
That's cool. Are you were you aiming with this like ground chicken and veggies? Are you aiming for a certain kind of calorie count or anything like that, or?
Yeah, definitely dropping the calories, and also just trying to add more vegetables and try to just avoid goofy carbs. Now, granted, afterwards, I did have one. I didn't do two, but I did have one. No, I did do two. Let me stop lying. I did do two shortbread cookies, but I was just like, all right, I've been to the gym. I went to the gym twice today, so I'm good. I'm good.
That is pretty good. That is pretty good. I just went through. I did Noom, or actually, I'm still doing Noom, yeah. But like I think during the pandemic, I was one of these people making sourdough breads like every week, and I ballooned up to like my highest weight ever. So I did Noom, and I dropped 25 pounds. And so, now I have a pretty good regulation of, like it's a combination of like the right calories, I'll do yoga every night, and, and now I have more energy for my 7-year-old that I did not have 2 years ago. So, I'm grateful for putting the work in. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's great. And, for the folks, since, we'll sit here and just be, two dudes. I want to kick off things by one, thanking you for coming on. And this is sort of the, continuation of meeting you and then feeling like I'm getting to know you as I'm going through your work or what have you. And I was like, all right, I got how can I put it? You watch like those movies, the detective movies, and it's like strings from different points. I feel like I have that for you. So for the folks who are undipped and unfamiliar, can you please introduce yourself? And let's just start off there. Introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Jonathan Baylis. I write an autobiographical comic book called Sew Buttons. Every story begins with the word sew. So I met this person. So I went over here. So I did this thing. And the way that I write it, I write it as the stories come to me. And sometimes stories are immediate, and sometimes stories take 10 years. And so each issue, I don't want to say is all over the place, but it comes from different time frames. So there's not necessarily a straight line, though the past couple of years, I feel like I've tried to actually curate it in a way so that when someone reads the issue, that that there is some kind of flow to it. And I think that actually it worked out, particularly with this issue, number 13, that I had a couple of initial issues at the Small Press Expo, but I'm about to launch a Kickstarter at the end of the month in September. to really do a big send off of the new issue. But yeah, Autobio Comics. That's what I do.
I love it, and we're definitely going to tap into that a bit more and to the Kickstarter a bit more. So we're a little bit removed from SPX, and I want to tap into sort of what has 2023 been like. We're headed into what, Q4 of 2023. So what has that been like for you from a creativity standpoint, from a putting your book out there or putting your books out there? Because it is like, as a person that purchased them, I'll say this, I must say this before I even get to the conclusion of that question. I rarely say, I'm going to start reading this. And, dude, you left an impression on me just in meeting you in that brief period. I was like, I like this dude. I was literally what I said to my girl. I was like, I like this dude. I'm going to read this book immediately. And she was like, you're still reading it? I was like, yes, because it's funny and relatable. So, outside of that being a highlight, meaning the great Rob Lee, what has been a highlight for you within your world over 2023?
So, I mean, it's funny. You met me at the highlight of the year. I'm telling you, this is the absolute truth, right? So every year, because you were, just to go backwards, since you were asking about 2023 and how it's been, usually the way it works is I'll premiere a new issue at SPX, which is always in September in Bethesda, Maryland. Then after that, I'm usually inspired to write down a couple of notes, and and I'm picking up mini comics from people, and I always find new artists at SPX and stuff. Like this time around, I met this guy at a festival called Cake in Chicago. His name's Craig Campbell, and he's very associated with CXC, and I think Columbus. Maybe he teaches a class in comics in Columbus. And we were just talking at the bar, and he's like, I want to collaborate. And I was like, yeah, that's great. I was like, and I Instagrammed him. I was like, give me your top 5 favorite movies. And then he gave me his movies. And sometimes I'll just stew in it for a little while. But this time it was immediate. I wonder if in the background you hear Brooklyn, a little bit of Brooklyn, the sirens going on. But his film prompts immediately led me to write some notes. And then I just emailed him today being like, here are 5 potential things I could write about. Let me know if any of these sound interesting to you. So then in the beginning of a year is when I'm trying to script. I'm trying to script for 3 months, January to March, let's say. And then so I'm starting to send out scripts in March, hoping that I'll get artwork back by, the deadline is always the end of June or July 4th or something like that. And then, no one ever makes it. They need the whole entire month of July. And then I print the books in August, and I have it in September again for SPX. And this year for SPX, I did my best sales ever at a convention in one day. Maybe the most books I've ever sold are 68, right? And probably at an SPX. I sold 75 in one day at SPX. That was amazing. So that was already good. And then coming into SPX, I've never been on a panel before. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never been on a panel. But I think mostly that has something to do with the fact that I'm just a writer, right? Most people at these small indie cons are both writer and artist, in one, a self-sustaining creator, where, so I think as just a writer, I don't know, I don't know if people look at me in the same way, but I got asked to be on this storytelling panel called Carousel, which is run by a guy from, I'm pretty sure he lives in Brooklyn, but he puts the show on in Brooklyn, Bob Sikoriak, who is a genius mimic artist of different styles, but he runs a show called Carousel, and I was on Carousel. And then there was a panel the next day, a collaboration panel, and my watch. There was a panel the next day, and somebody dropped out, and they asked me if I wanted to be on the collaboration panel, and I said yes, but it was with the Tamakis, right? So it was there was like 100 people in that audience, every single one of them there for the Tamakis, not there for me, but like I have an upbeat personality, and so I try to throw a couple of jokes out there, whatever. And I did that panel, and also on the first day, I was talking with Francesca Lynn, who I know, through SPX. Like I think she runs the Ignatzes now, but she's got a doctorate, like maybe even a doctorate in comics. And so whenever I see her, I go, "What's up, Doc?" And I saw her, and she's like, "Baylis, you could talk. Give out an Ignatz." And I go, "Yes, I want to do that." Like, so I gave out an Ignatz at the Ignatz Awards, and I gave it to Kate Beaton, who's Canadian, and I'm married to a Canadian. And I just found out I'm partially Canadian in my ancestry. So, whatever. That was great. So the SPX was amazing, the best ever. And that was the highlight of my year, maybe the highlight of my mini comics career of 15 years.
So Canadian.
So Canadian. You're so Japanese Canadian. I am 25% Japanese, apparently.
It's funny. I have a buddy who is Japanese, Philadelphia based, and because I wanted to connect with him, we checked out the temple that he works at in the middle of Philadelphia, and I started taking Duolingo courses on Japanese.
Oh wow, that's got to be tough. That has got to be tough. I mean, I've been surrounded. The coincidence of this is I was surrounded by Japanese culture as a child. Like there were a lot of Japanese people on my street because we had it was one of these things where you had a business exchange program because IBM was in my town with Japan. And so businessmen would come and live for 5 years in our town. And so our Japanese school was created, and there were tons of origami books in my library. So I was always connected to Japanese culture. So it's like this kind of almost amazing, fun coincidence that I discover I'm 25% Japanese. Like, it's kind of amazing.
It is. And I'll throw this in before I move to my next question.
Yes.
Yes. I attended the collaboration panel, and it's funny. Me and my partner, we both went there because you mentioned it. We went there for you.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
And she's gonna enjoy this because she and I both are doing our own sort of separate comic thing, both as writers and working with artists. So definitely it's something that was relatable and we kind of connected with.
Oh, nice.
So comics are often a blend of art, storytelling, and a space where culture meets imagination. Where does your comics journey begin? And I have a second question within that, but I at least want to give you the space to answer that part.
So my genesis with comics, I mean, surely I read comics I learned how to read through comics as a kid. Like, I'm born in the Bronx, and my mom, bought me Spider-Man off the rack, and that, I just learned how to read at 3 by reading Spider-Man comic books, and continued reading my whole life. And but later in life, I went to NYU Film School. Right, I went to school for filmmaking. And I think by junior year, I needed a little bit of a break. So I actually wound up moving to London. And in London, down the street, was a comic book store owned by a guy from Queens. Like, crazy coincidence. And so it was almost like this home away from home thing, and being surrounded by comics. And I started discovering indie comics because I was only really a Marvel DC guy, like a lot of people, or most people. But then I was opened up to brand new things. I was opened up to the British small press, guys like Eddie Campbell and Phil Elliott and Shaky Kane. But also, like, I was going through Marvel had this epic line of comics, and I was into this guy Ted McKeever, and discovering Mobius and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, I love comics. Maybe I want to work in comics and not film. And so I came back to New York. My senior year, got an internship, and that internship was at Marvel Comics. So I interned at Marvel Comics, and on day 1, Jack Kirby dies. And I was interning on this book called Marvel Age, which was sort of a wizard magazine just for Marvel in comic book form. And I wrote the obituary for Jack Kirby for Marvel Age, and I was hoping to get a job there, but like the industry was already a little weird, and this is like in 1994, and then I couldn't get a job, and then I wound up meeting an editor from Valiant Comics, and I said, hey. Actually, this is slightly interesting, and I even did a comic story about it. So I couldn't get a job at Marvel, but they still invited me to go to some screening. And so while I'm at this screening, it was for Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein. I was behind a couple of Marvel editors being like, hey, got any leads on jobs? Got any leads on jobs? And the guy that I was sitting behind is a guy named Christian Cooper. And I don't know if that name is familiar to you. He was, I think, assistant editor on Ghost Rider at the time, but now he's like a famous New York City bird watcher guy. And I think Disney's even giving him like a show, but he went through a whole incident last year where he ran into some Karen that was like, saying like, hey, you're being mean to my dog and whatever. And this is like such a nice guy. like he's there bird watching, and there's some Karen, whatever. Now he's got a bird show on Disney or something. Anyway, so I'm behind Chris Cooper. I'm like, Chris, you got any jobs? He's like, no, I don't have any jobs. I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. But then next to me is a guy from Valiant. And that guy's like, hey, how do you want to, you want to work at Valiant? And I go, yeah, I want to work at Valiant. So then I got an internship at Valiant, and I was there for a year. And then I also wound up getting an internship at the Topps company. They were doing comics at the time. And then that turned into an actual job. So I became an assistant editor on a book based on, because, Topps only does licensed products, based on a failed Fox Space Marines in the Future show called Space Above and Beyond. And I worked on that comic, and then the comics line totally imploded. And so then I worked in trading cards. Yeah. And so then I was working on Star Wars cards and X-Files cards and Xena cards. And while I was there, I was still being exposed to all kinds of independent comics. And I saw a newspaper called Free Comics NYC. And it was just local comics people putting out a newspaper. And I said, oh, I could do this. I know I could write something like this. And a guy from work was like, well, I could draw it. And I was like, great, well, let's do it. And so that was the first So Button strip. Oh, my alarm again. Stop that. So this guy at work said that he could draw it. And I was like, yeah, well, let's do it. And so I wrote this strip. He drew it. I sent it to the newspaper. They said yes. They printed it. It was super exciting. And I had a couple of more ideas for stories. And then that newspaper folded like immediately, like after I think the second issue or third issue. But then I was dating this comedian at the time. Her name is now my wife, Ophira Eisenberg. And in these comedy clubs was a magazine called The Comical. And in the back was a reprint of a Harvey Pekar strip. And I was like, well, if they have a reprint of something, maybe they want something new and maybe directly related to stand-up comedy. And so I wrote the guy, and I was like, hey, how would you like a comedian comic, comic strip? And the guy was like, yes. And so in that publication lasted for a few months. And I did a few strips for that magazine. And then I started to notice and I got my first art. So my first artist, he stopped doing art completely after that one strip he did for me. And so then I found artists through the Joe Kubert School in Jersey through Craigslist. I put out an ad that was like guaranteed printing, be an artist. And so I got two guys. One was the artist for that, and the other one did this other strip because like a literary anthology was asking for a comic, and they accepted that one. So the two artists immediately got printed in these publications, and then all of a sudden I had a bunch of strips. So I was like, well, let me just put together a comic, and that'll be that.
Yeah.
So I apply to this thing called MoCA, which is an annual festival in New York, and MoCA stands for Museum of Comic and Cartooning Art. And I brought my one comic, and they had switched from being in the Puck Building to this place called the Armory. It was 100 degrees. There's no air conditioning, and I just sold my one book, and I sold 6 copies over 2 days, and it was super thrilling. And I still had like a leftover story that wasn't printed, so I was like, well, maybe I'll make 2 comics and I'll be done. And now I'm on 13 comics and I'm not done. I'm not done. So that's sort of the genesis of Sew Buttons.
Thank you. Wow. And the thing is it's funny. You're like helping me like kind of like sort through questions that I have. So I'm like checking them off as I'm going.
Sure.
And so for you, the storytelling component, there's sort of 2 pieces that relate back to Sew Buttons. So one is the storytelling side. So I want to get a sense on how do you go through, like, you're experiencing something. I want to note this, like, this could be an interesting story later. Are you thinking in that mindset? Do you keep the notepad with you? Do you keep the iMessage up? And
I'm always I use the iPhone. I use the iPhone for walking around, and often I will do a voice record when I have like a line that's like, oh, do a story about this thing. Because I think one of the things it's sort of like Sew Buttons has been a discovery in general. Like, it's sort of like, I don't know why I started Sew Buttons and why I kept it going, but now I realize what I'm doing is I'm documenting all these little stories I've just told my whole life, right? Like, I just tell all of these little stories, and now I'm just turning them into comics. So sometimes I'll go, oh, this story about this girl that I had a crush on for 10 years. I was like, write that story, so I'll do that. But I'm always keeping like some people will keep a physical file. I have a folder on my hard drive, like I've just always had computers, and I've got a folder on my hard drive that's just simply like comics, and then it goes stories, and then there's like 100 other folders, and it's either like it's got a line of a story, or it's got bullet points of a fuller story, or sometimes I just immediately flesh out a story, because most of my stuff is like 1 to 4 pages for Sew Buttons. So like some songwriters, I could write a story in 20 minutes, and others take 10 years. Like that, it's worked out both ways. Like, I'm in a constant state of reviewing of the notes and seeing what inspires me today. But also when I'm working with a new artist, like I was talking about Craig, I was like, oh, there's this like, Pulp Fiction story that I want to do. And like, if he likes that, then, I will flesh it out for him, because I already have a couple of bullet points.
And so in that, what is that like in sort of, sourcing and reaching out to artists? You gave that example, and I remember, in the panel or what have you, because Carl was on the panel with you, who worked on 13. So, what is that like? Because, this podcast is very collaborative, right? 700 episodes, right? So
that's amazing.
And then, you have varying degrees. Some people are like, I framed it in the past like a creative blind date. You never really know, like, oh, okay, I know about your work, but you could be a flake, or you could be just not the most conversational person, or super shy, or what have you. So what are some of those sort of like early things? Like, you can dig someone's work, but working with them might be a sort of a different vibe. Tell me about how do you kind of like look through that to figure out, like, I'm sharing this autobiographical story and they're going to, visualize it. How does that, sort of relationship come to be?
So it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of ways to answer this question. So in the beginning, I had only worked with like just a few artists for, a couple of issues. And now it's grown to like 60 or something like that. and there's a good combination as far as asking. Like, it's very simple. Like, I see an artist, or I like their work, and I will just ask them, and I offer money. Everyone is paid. So so it's, I want to say it's a respectful ask, each time. At a minimum, it's respectful in that regard. So but it's usually like, I look at their style and I go, I think I could write something to their style. And I'm a collaborative person. Like, my entire life is kind of collaboration. Like, my day job, I've been like a kind of a writer, producer of promos, like TV promos, for 20 years. And I'm working with different voiceover artists, different editors, different producers, different creative directors. Like, everything's collaboration. So I think I have a built up skill to work with different people and to tailor my work to their tastes, right? So in the beginning, it was like, I really wanted to expand who I work with. So I would just buy mini comics at these conventions, and then I would just email them, and I would say, hey, I like your work. I would like to work with you. I will pay you. And in the beginning, most of the people that I worked with were like really at the beginning. So I was a lot of people's first paycheck, I think. I mean, like, we're not talking like $1 million here, but hundreds of dollars, and that's nice for somebody who's never been paid before to do their art. So it started off that way, and I realized that pretty quickly that almost everyone I worked with was like a dude. And I was like, man, I got to find some women, right? And so I was like, I want to diversify. So there was this group of artists that were sort of collaborating, or at least working in the same space in Brooklyn, and they called themselves Pizza Island. And I think they were already way too famous. I mean, I got rejected by every single one of them, but every single one of them is like crazy successful now, right? It's like Kate Beaton and Julia Wirtz and Lisa Hannawalt. She's had two Netflix shows. I mean, like, just people who are like outrageously good, and so there's a lot of rejection in asking artists to work on something that's not theirs, which is I hold no grudges whatsoever. I mean, I approach these people because I like their work. So, but eventually I did start getting some women artists, and then I was like, I still don't think I'm diverse enough. And then so I go, so do you know who Mari Naomi is? Is that someone you know? She, no, I shouldn't say she. She, I believe Mari identifies as non-binary. So I say they. So they created a couple of databases. One was a person of color cartoonist database, and one was an LGBTQ cartoonist database. And now, after 13 issues, every single issue, I go to one of those databases to find somebody new and different to work with. And and some of the combinations of different backgrounds just adds everything to the mix of collaboration, right? I mean, like if every So Buttons was just purely one older nebbishy Jewish guy from New York, I felt like it needed flavor, and by working with so many different artists, I get a lot of flavors in there. There's a lot of spices that are added in there that people don't even necessarily notice. It's not like, a lot of it could be even super subtle, but to me, it's everything that I'm working with so many different people.
It's great. So I got two more sort of real questions that I want to ask you, and then I want to hit you with some rapid fire questions in the back end, because those are always fun.
Yeah.
So, as a fellow Aquarian,
yes.
I'm intrigued. Talk about how you maybe embrace your quirks or your strangeness, if you will, because I think we all have it. Like, I'm a strange dude. How do you embrace that as it, perhaps fuels your creativity? Like, what are those sort of traits about you that a lot of times I think are connected to star signs, but, I'm sure someone will disagree with me. But some of those traits that kind of show up in your work, how you approach your work or how you approach collaboration, but some of those weird, traits.
So it's funny. I am not an astrological guy, but I think what you've picked up on is that I've been doing a series of strips in the past few issues of So Buttons where I have done strips about people who share my birthday, my actual birthday. So it's like not even a sign. It's sort of like it's 100% my birthday, just different years, and it's almost this exercise in like how much I am not like these people, but it's an exercise in, can I do this in one page? Like, I'll do a celebrity bio in one page, but in my, sort of, narcissistic autobio way, still make it about me. How do I connect it? Right. How do I connect it? And so, one of the first ones was Carol Channing. Carol Channing was, she's like dead many years now, but was the first person to play Hello Dolly and on Broadway. And I made that connection that in my aunt's house, she's got an Al Hirschfeld print of Stockard Channing. And I go, here's this connect the dot. By the way, we share the same birthday. Happy birthday to us, right? And then in this past issue, I did one for Nolan Ryan. Nolan Ryan, the baseball pitcher. I mean, there's nothing athletic about me whatsoever, except I'll fold myself into a yoga pose at night. But I can't throw a baseball. But Nolan Ryan's a Hall of Famer. But he was on the Mets first, and I am a Mets fan. If I ever go to a baseball game, I'll go to a Mets game over a Yankees game. I don't hate the Yankees. I'm born in the Bronx. But my dad was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, so he can't raise his son to like the Yankees. So I'm a Mets fan. Anyway, so, that's how I connect Nolan Ryan to me. And so, like, at this point, there's like 6 of those strips. And, I at one point I was trying to figure out, like, well, what am I going to do with these besides putting in So Buttons, or like, what's the through line of it? And one day I asked Alexa, what are the traits of an Aquarius?
Yeah.
And is it
the Aquarius sign are known to be authoritative, free-spirited, and eccentric. However, they are also sometimes said to be extreme, inconsistent, unpredictable, and detached.
Right. So there were these positive traits, attributed to Aquarius, and my son goes, "Dad, you're none of those things." And I just thought, I was like, you just created the arc. You just created the arc. The arc is is me asking about the traits of an Aquarius, and my son saying, "You're none of those things, but all of these people are those things," and that will bring it all together when I do 20 of these or something. But I'm only on 6. It's also like when I'm working with somebody brand new, and it's like I don't want to give them a multi-pager. It's a good test to be like, hey, I'm doing these one-pagers. Do any of these names intrigue you? And I'll write that up. So, I share the same birthday with Kerry Washington, and I've been wanting to work with Ben Passmore, and Ben has a really great color palette. And I'm like, he's so political, but like, what if he did something that was just totally opposite? And he did a story about Kerry Washington's dress, and he did it, and it was great and it was beautiful. And, it's just funny, the things that come out of, just these random prompts. Aquarians, I guess they're supposed to be kind of artistic and eccentric, And I guess I am that way for sure. And I'm making comics about people literally born on my birthday.
It's good. It's good. I'll throw these out. I got Buzz Aldrin, Questlove, and Evan Peters.
Oh wow, that's cool. Questlove used to do. I worked for NBC Universal, and he would always do our parties. He's a DJ, and he would do he would do our parties, and and he's like already in the building because he was like on the band for Jimmy Fallon or whatever, So that was like an easy gig for him. It's like he just came downstairs.
That's great.
Threw a party. But that's cool. That's cool.
It was definitely in the list, as I was saying, like before we got started. My partner who was there at SPS with me, and she was just like, all right, dude just mentioned that he does the same thing that you do, so you got to ask that question. In terms of she's like, how do you know everybody who has the same birthday that you do? I was like, I keep an index.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just
I wrote it all out. I wrote it all out. There's like a whole list.
Looking for commonalities. So this is sort of the last one that I got for you. And we'll sort of like wrap this portion up on this one. I think a lot of times creative folks, often walk this line between ego and insecurity. I know that I walk it. I stumbled on it. How do you navigate sort of that terrain in your creative life, and especially in kind of like writing stories that are experiences that you've had or what have you, and we kind of live and die with our work sometimes. Like, I know if this episode doesn't get 9 million views, I'm going to be really upset about it. So it's sort of that. So talk about that a bit.
It's hard. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, my background is I was like a bullied kid in school for most of my childhood. So, in general, I am super insecure in life, and in comics, I always feel like I started maybe 10 years later. Like when I was exhibiting at that MoCA the first time, I was like in my 30s when people were in their 20s. And so I've always been older, and I've always felt like an outsider. And I think I developed this, like extroverted character that, so I mean, like what you're seeing of me right now and what you see of me at a convention is somehow I don't even know how I do it anymore, but I click into this extroverted character. But on the inside, I'm very much a mess at all these conventions. And this convention was the first one in 15 years I really felt comfortable in my skin. So how I deal with it. I mean, I feel like comics for me it's barely a choice, right? Like I think because maybe, like if you want to get psychological, you can go, well, I learned how to read that way. And so my brain developed with comics. Comics is part of my brain. So now that I'm an adult, it's still a part of my brain. And so that's how I think creatively. I think in creative terms of making comics. But, to sell comics at a table is such a gut-wrenching thing. But, I mean, at this point, I now have certain speeches. I'll go like, what I do is funny true stories adapted by different artists. And then when they're looking at the horror issue, I go like, yes, like I said, normally I do true stories, but this one's clearly a horror issue. And the first story is a true story about how I found a dead body. And almost every time someone will go like, like what? Or like they'll have a gasp, and I go, but there's a twist, and it's whatever. So I have these little speeches. And I fall into them. And now I just do this thing where if someone is looking at my table, I now basically just grab them with my eyes and hand movements, and I go, you need to look at this. And and so now I feel almost a little bad about it, but like I used to be uncomfortable selling, but now I'm like, no, I'm gonna fucking sell. I don't know if I can curse, but like, I was like, but I'm gonna sell. And like I could almost always tell too, like this person, I got a story for that person. I could just like I could just tell. And I'm gonna say usually they're older, but I'm always like I feel like the kids of today could look at Sew Buttons and enjoy it, but they've got to look past this old exterior.
You look super young for one. And when I looked up, because you and my partner are the same age, and when I looked it up, I was like, huh. And but yeah, definitely, I'm always sort of questioning as to what these interactions are going to be. People are freaking weird at conventions sometimes, and you know, when I popped over there and I was like, all right. And you figured it out very early. Like I have a background in marketing. I usually don't go for like the sales pitch or whatever feels like that. But I was like, no, I like this dude. That was literally the thing I took from it. And I was like, I think I mentioned it. I was like, the plan is for me and her to buy comics tomorrow. And I was like, I'm buying a comic now. So
gotta buy it now.
And then I came back over the next day because I still have your coffee. I still have all of that stuff.
Oh, that's right. You got the coffee too, right?
Yeah.
It's good, right? My coffee's good.
It is. And it is one of those things where, you see what someone is doing and you pick up on it, because I definitely relate in terms of, I have to do anything that's different from what I normally do. This is kind of what I do, but it was like, hey, do a panel, moderate something. I'm like, yeah, my stomach is nuts. And I'm 6'4", right? Like, which I take up a lot of space. I can't really hide and be like, oh yeah, I'm just over here. So trying to navigate that and, really being able to pick that up from people. And when I go to these different conventions, and I always like going to SPX and looking at this is the second year I've gone, because I think it's something about, generally speaking, it's something about folks who are independent. They're not jaded. They're accessible. And you're the first of like 4 interviews I've booked, from
oh, wow.
that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. And who else you got? Anyone I know?
Carl.
Oh, Carl, you interview Carl?
I'm going to interview him soon. Yeah. I bought a couple books from him, and it's going to be a good chat. And I reached out to Reagan as well, Reagan Buchanan, and going to do that. And,
oh man, that she seems super cool, right? Like, like she's got the Black Punk comic. Yeah. That's cool.
So it's that. And it's kind of like, and especially in that time and going to the expo, like I've kind of shifted, putting myself out there is it's a lot that you have to do sometimes. But I think, especially in doing these interviews and booking guests and so on, because it's one-man show. But when it comes around to being around your people, and it's just like, comics is my crime alley, if you will. That was what I wanted to do creatively starting out. And I got rejected from the School of the Arts. Oh. I crushed it for me. So I just abandoned that idea. But
I'm glad you didn't waste your money. I went to film school. No one needs film school. No one needs that. Just be a PA, and if you want to do comics, just fucking draw. Like no one needs any of these places. They're not teaching the good shit anyway. And I think and I think not only are these places charging kids, whatever it is, like $100,000, and they're putting them in debt, they're not telling them that there's no money in it. It's like they're like, pay us the money. The money is in the teaching. Like there's no money out there in comics. Like and kids are getting their hearts broken because they think there's money out there, and there really isn't, or there's so little of it. And I think people aren't being honest with a lot of kids today in the arts. Like like America is hard right now, and I think a lot of these kids are being taken advantage of.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of validity there. And yeah, I think, it's the Austin Kleon thing. I didn't want to have the phantom limb syndrome, and I came back to it. And now I've kind of looked at what I'm doing, just trying to fund this and trying to do all of that stuff. And we definitely have to talk about the Kickstarter in a bit. But, it is one of those things where, I was able to maneuver my day job and use that as my funder to fund these activities, and having my background and my skill set to keep the costs down. And at the end of the day, it's just like, I don't pay myself, obviously, but I pay anybody that works with me in doing this. And the goal is, it's not because I need to have X amount of downloads, though I have a relationship with the numbers, but it's more so I'm able to talk to super talented people like yourself and act like I'm smarter than I am. That's one of the key things that comes out of it. So what I want to do next in these sort of final moments is, we got a couple of things. We got rapid fire questions. And as I say with everyone, don't overthink these. Whatever the answer is the answer. So let's see. I got the first one. Outside of comics, and I know you've touched on yoga, you're a dad, you're a husband. What is one thing that you're very passionate about outside of like creative work?
Oh my God. Outside of creative work, baking sourdough loaves.
That's good. It's a good callback. Yeah. What is your favorite adult beverage?
I really like peaty scotch from Isla. So it's like a Lefroy is a brand I really like.
Okay. I'm using this to take ideas now. What is, specifically with Sew Buttons, what is one trait or one characteristic that makes for a good story?
I think, and my wife is a storyteller. She tells the stories with an organization called The Moth, and they've got a podcast and a radio show and stuff. And she has always instilled in me that if your life doesn't change in some way, it's an anecdote. It's a story if your life changes. So I really try to, even in a one-page story, try to make something change in my life. And since Sew Buttons tends to be very positive, because I try to look at it as an antidote to a lot of like, woe is me autobio stuff. I want it to be more positive and happy. It's usually a happy change. That's what I hope for most of the time.
I dig it. Now, this is sort of the last one. One of the things that hooked me early on in seeing, the trade of Sew Buttons was the cover, and I've noticed several movie references in there, which brings up this question. What movie universe do you think you would fit best in?
What movie universe? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure at some point that answer would have been like a Woody Allen universe, but that universe has been canceled,
deprecated.
That's it for me. I'm done with that universe. What universe would I be a part? You know what? I just happened upon, I subscribe to the Criterion collection because I'm like a film nerd guy. And there's a Long Island filmmaker that was popular in the late 80s and 90s, a guy named Hal Hartley. And even though I'm not a Long Island guy, there's something about there's a quirky nature to his films and the way that people talk. And then there's every once in a while is a random musical number. And I go, that's me. I walk around and all of a sudden I start singing, drives my kid crazy. But, I would say the Hal Hartley universe is where I would probably fit in. All right.
Love it. So that is pretty much the crux of the main podcast here. And, one, I want to thank you for coming on and chatting it out with me. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to, in these final moments, share where folks can check you out, share some information on your Patreon, your Kickstarter, share some information that's coming up. Where can folks check you out and check your work out and to support your work? The floor is yours.
Sure. What I do a lot of is on Instagram. You could find me at Sew Buttons Comics, and Sew is S-O, because every story starts with Sew. Sew Buttons Comics, and I will put up every couple of days a page of comics as part of a story. So you'll see, 6 to 9 panels as like a swipe story. So if you just want to read some stuff, there's a ton of stories there to dive into. I have a website called sewbuttons.com. That's where you can kind of buy back issues and also look at some samples. But I'm about to do a Kickstarter for the brand new issue. I printed a couple of copies for SPX, but I want to do a bigger print run and hopefully with some like bells and whistles on it, like spot gloss and stuff. And I'm doing a Kickstarter. So that's going to start at the end of September. So I'm sure if you look for something called Sew Buttons Film School in October, you'll find me. And that's how you could order the new issue and every other back issue as an add-on.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Jonathan Baylis for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.